21 states filing a lawsuit against the Biden administration for ending construction on the Keystone Pipeline. The lawsuit is led by Texas and Montana, and it argues that regulation of interstate and international commerce should be decided by Congress, and Biden's executive order committed a serious overreach. Our next guest is also slamming Biden's attacks on the energy industry in a new article that is called America's Energy Policy Should Be All of the Above, Not Everything But. And joining us now to discuss is Republican Congressman Estes from Kansas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Congressman, you began your piece by saying that the recent Arctic freeze that we experienced in Texas and all those folks out there should be a wake-up call for Americans. Why is that?
Well, it really should. We need to look at how do we make sure that we maintain Americans' energy independence, which we had for the last several years. And when President Biden was campaigning, he was talking about jobs. And one of the first things out of the gate when he got into office was to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline and cancel those thousands of jobs. Instead, we need to be looking at how do we make sure that we provide energy for everybody. And that means continuing use of fossil fuel, natural gas, gasoline, and use of even coal, as long as we're using it in a clean, safe way, making sure that we do conservation and doing renewables. I mean, we get a lot of value out of wind energy. We get a lot of value out of solar, but they can't provide all of our utility needs, which we saw particularly with this cold spell that came through the middle of the country, all the way south down to Texas.
Is there a shortage of energy?
So there's really not a shortage. I mean, you look back a year ago, I mean, we in America, we're actually exporting energy in terms of oil and natural gas. And so we have a lot of energy. We have a lot of abilities. It's when the federal government tries to come in and set standards and picks and choose what energy programs we should have and does massive tax subsidies and or policy restrictions is what really damages our economy.
So do you think that offering those subsidies for more forms of energy versus just the forms of energy that are supported by the Green New Deal and those types of folks would help rectify or maybe have a more even keel playing field?
So what I'm a big advocate that we have free and fair markets, and that we make sure that people have the options to choose. And in some cases, you may want to heat your home with natural gas. Some cases, you may want to heat your home with electricity. Some cases you may want to pay, even if it's a little bit more, to guarantee that you get renewable wind or solar energy. And folks are making that choice. We don't need federal bureaucrats in Washington to make those decisions for us.
You know, free and fair markets sounds great. It probably sounded great in Texas, where they apparently didn't winterize some of their equipment and that sort of thing when this cold wave hit. What would you have fixed there? What would you have done differently? Because they were very proud of being their own grid, if you will, and having free and fair markets and being deregulated. And then the people on the left now are saying, see, this shows you got to regulate them, you got to make them do this or that. How would you have addressed that issue?
Yeah, I think the piece that was missing there was looking at what's the insurance policy when things really go to the extremes. Everything works great. You have normal weather, you have normal energy flow, but you have to plan for the worst case scenario, right? Even though you don't necessarily want to pay for it. You do have to put a little insurance policy in.
But how do you force that, sir, if it's a free and fair market, as you're describing? Apparently they just flat out didn't.
And what they're seeing now is the consequences of having those higher energy bills through that process. We need to make sure that, a smart way to operate that, and, some of the discussions that are coming out, particularly in Texas and with the ERCOT energy there, or the ERCOT organization there, is looking at how do you make sure that you do have that support on an ongoing basis when you get that worst case, the extreme swings.
Isn't part of the issue what happened in Texas, and then I think it's in danger of happening in some other states as well, going back to the subsidies that you were talking about? There's so much of an emphasis being put on renewable energies, for example, wind and solar, such that people aren't necessarily being paid, or they don't get the same return if they try to invest in some of the traditional forms of energy. So that's where we begin to see this discrepancy.
That's right. What you see is it's very tough to scale up additional wind or additional solar because they're basically either on or off. And if the wind's blowing more or if the sun's shining more, you get good energy. But when the wind dies down or the sun goes down, you lose out on that. It's a whole lot easier, particularly with natural gas, to be able to produce more electricity and to have it available on demand. And unfortunately, the push that we've had in so many cases of let's expand our use of renewables and ignore some of the base and the peak load production that we can use and rely on is hurting us. We saw it here this winter. We've seen it over the last couple of years in California as restrictions they've put on producing some of that base load and that peak load capacity, primarily using fossil fuels because that's what's renewable.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. All of the above, not everything but. Congressman Estes, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right.